So for this video, I'm going to go through each of the red spells and artifact, and I'm going to give them like a mini review. We're going to talk about what makes them good, what makes them bad. You know, are they seeing play in constructed, seeing play in draft? If they're not seeing play, why is that? And maybe even what we could look for in the future if the cards are bad that might make them better. Now, when I say review, I'm not going to give points. There's not going to be any 4 out of 5 stars or anything like that. I just like to talk about essentially what makes the card good so that you've got good information and you can make your own educated decisions with the card now and in the future. So with that intro out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get started, and we begin with Fight Through the Pain. So this is 1 mana. You give a red hero +2 armor this round and you get initiative. And that second line, aka get initiative, is the important part of this card. Initiative is very powerful in Artifact. There's not many cards that grant initiative in Artifact right now, and as such, this card does see play. It's not an auto-include in every deck that runs red, but it is, you know, certainly powerful enough to be considered. Traditionally, you would want to run this in a red deck that has at least 3 red heroes, because you would want the ability to gain initiative to have a higher chance of being impactful. Meaning, if this is in a deck that only has like 2 red heroes, for example, then if one of your red heroes is dead, then you can only play this in the one lane where your other red hero is. And at max, even if they're both alive, if you really need initiative in one lane and that just happens to be the one lane where your red hero is not present, then you can get hosed. So traditionally, this is the kind of card you would want to include if you are running 3 red heroes to maximize the potential for this giving you initiative when you need it most. Now, the +2 armor is pretty inconsequential most of the time. Red heroes are the most resilient of the heroes in the game right now. Red is all about, you know, big, beefy meat shields when it comes to heroes. And I'm not saying that the +2 armor has never mattered, because there are times where it matters, but it's less likely to matter on a red hero than it would be, say, like a blue hero. But again, you're really playing this for the get initiative, and you're also playing this because it's 1 mana. The other get initiative cards are relatively expensive. Arcane Assault being 4 mana, Hipfire being 4 mana, Chain Frost is 7. The only other one that's 1 mana is again a red card, and that is the Good Buddy Tides signature card. So this is certainly playable both in constructed and in draft, and it's going to be one of those things that is going to depend on your deck construction. You know, do you have enough red heroes to support it? And are there cards you want to have initiative for? Initiative is powerful, but it's only powerful if you can capitalize on it. There's been a couple of times where I've had Fight Through the Pain and even been running like 3 red heroes, but then when I looked at my deck in draft, there were so few ways that I could truly capitalize on initiative that I ended up just not running it. So, you know, if you can take advantage of initiative and you have the heroes and the card structure to support it, it can be a really good play. Next up, we have New Orders. Really straightforward. 1 mana, choose an ally, choose a combat target for it. And this card does not see play in constructed. It's just too low on the power curve. It's not good enough to take one of your precious 25 slots in a 40 card deck that are made up from non-signature cards. It is okay as a filler card in draft. You're never excited about running it. Well, I take that back. If you draft like 2 Bristlebacks, then something like New Orders can actually really help your Bristlebacks snowball, but that's very niche. For the most part, you're not really excited to run New Orders. You'd much rather run something impactful, you know, high impact cards, creeps that give you a presence on the board, just anything. But it's okay, right? Sometimes you catch a bad arrow. Sometimes you just really want to kill off a pesky hero, whatever the case may be. So retargeting in combat does have its uses. Next up, we have Poised to Strike. 1 mana, give a red hero +4 attack this round. This is also just really low impact most of the time. Red heroes traditionally have some of the highest attack in the game. It's red and black that are your heavy hitters, and giving a red hero +4 attack is a lot of times just overkill, and if you really do want to give them more attack, it's typically more economical to just give them like a weapon as opposed to this 1 mana investment for only a +4 attack this round. Poised to Strike can help push down towers. Like if you were playing a really hyper aggressive deck, then you know maybe you run these because you're trying to do something cheeky like that. But again, it has to be on a red hero, and it's +4 attack. And so if your red hero is in a position where it's targeting something else, and the +4 attack isn't going to push it like over a threshold to kill something, then it's a waste to play it. If your red hero is just being blocked by a melee creep and you can't push extra damage against a tower, then it's a waste to play it. It's very just dependent on the position of your red hero and that moment in time, and again, like it's just situational. I'm beating the dead horse here, you get the point. So not very good, doesn't really see a lot of play in Constructed, and if I'm being honest, I even rarely see it in Draft. You know, it might be like once every 20 or 30 games that I see an opponent play it against me. So next up we have Defensive Stance. Give a hero +3 armor this round. This card is just not very good. It's defensive and it can help keep, you know, a hero alive, but you have to have a red hero present to play this, and as I said earlier, they're already pretty resilient. And so if you're not playing this on your red hero, then you're trying to protect another hero. But the +3 armor this round is not great, even still, right? Armor doesn't help against piercing damage, and when you compare this to other cards, right? So this is 2 mana for +3 armor this round, but then when you compare it to something like Rumesk Blessing, granted that is green, but that card is 3 mana, so for 1 mana more, you get something that is cross-lane playable, grants 3 health instead of armor, so it is gonna help against piercing damage. It's a modify, so it's going to last beyond the round you play it, and it's cross-lane playable. It just makes this card look really, really bad. So this does not see play really in Constructed or Draft. Stuff that could make this playable, right? Like if we're trying to look at the bright side here, if we ever see cards that just really take advantage of the armor you have, right? Whether it's armor in a lane, armor on a hero, whatever the case may be, you get some really cool ability that just goes bonkers if you have like a really high armor value, right? Then this might become playable because of the synergy that it would provide. If you get some hero that's got like a long activated ability, but then when you activate it, it does like damage equal to twice the armor that this hero has or something, then yeah, you might run Defensive Stance because you could like drop 2 Defensive Stance on it and then nuke something for 12 or whatever. Sure, right? You know, I'm just making stuff up off the top of my head, but my point is because this is specifically armor, if armor ever starts to matter a whole lot more, that's where this has the potential to shine, but right now it just gets outclassed as a defensive measure. Next up we have Heroic Resolve. This is part of a 2-card series. Heroic Resolve is 2 mana. You modify a red hero with, after you play a non-item card costing 2 or less, you modify this hero with +2 health. And this card I have seen played in Constructed. This and its counterpart Rising Anger, which we'll see in a little bit, are playable in mono red decks. I've seen them there. I've also seen a couple of red-blue decks where the blue side of things is really just like combat tricks and other cheap cards like Cunning Plan that would also trigger these, because the card itself just has to be 2 or less. It doesn't have to be a red card. And I've seen them played in those cases. Now, it doesn't mean that those decks are like ultra highly competitive. You know, some people have actually performed pretty well with mono red, don't get me wrong, but they're just not like super popular or prevalent, right? But these do see play. And the attraction here is that it is modify. The card triggers itself, so the first time you play this, you're modifying your red hero with +2 health, and then every time it triggers afterwards, it's also a modification again. So, like, even if your red hero does end up dying, and this doesn't keep them alive for forever, when they come back, they're going to be really resilient, and that is attractive. Now, this card and its counterpart Rising Anger traditionally see more play in Constructed than in Draft, just because these are build-around cards. These are the kinds of things that you want to leverage synergy with. You want to fill your deck with a bunch of low-cost options to trigger these, and you also want to fill your deck with cards that draw, because if you're playing all of these really cheap, 2 cost or less cards, you're going to run out of cards pretty quickly, so you have to have a way to reload your hand in those scenarios, but yeah, you want to build around it. So it doesn't see nearly as much play in draft as it does in constructed. Next up, we have pick a fight. Choose an allied hero, it taunts, and then you choose a combat target for it, meaning the hero that is taunting. This card I like more than the New Orders, just because it essentially does the exact same thing, but the fact that you can also make an allied hero taunt means that you can soak a lot of damage. So in lanes you're trying to defend, where you don't really care about whether or not you're winning that lane, dropping one hero there and then soaking up the damage from like 3 targets can be pretty impactful. And in the other scenarios where you're just using it to choose a combat target, it's often good enough. So the extra utility that this provides for 1 more mana than something like New Orders provides, in my opinion, makes this better. Still not good enough to see playing constructed, but I'm not upset if I have to run 1 or 2 of these in draft. Again, not picking them highly. They're not like amazing, but they're good filler cards. They've got utility. All right, so we have Rising Anger. This is part 2 of the Heroic Resolve Rising Anger like combo. 2 mana, modify a red hero with after you play a non-item card costing 2 or less. Modify this hero with +1 attack. So Heroic Resolve is +2 health. This is +1 attack. They trigger off of each other, and again, they trigger with your other cards. So yeah, it's all right. Take everything I said about Heroic Resolve, apply it to Rising Anger, and that is your assessment and analysis. Typically, if you're running one, you're running the other, and it's in constructed, and it's in some sort of build around deck. There you have it. Combat Training, 3 mana. Modify a hero with +2 attack. Much like the green version of this one is still not good. In fact, this one might be worse than the green version, because at least green is filled with a bunch of heroes that have relatively low attack values, but this is in red. So to play this, it's got to be where a red hero is present, and most of your red heroes really don't need the extra attack, and if they do, then you're fine with getting it from items. So this is like more likely to be played in a lane where you have a red hero and something else that could use the attack. So yeah, this might even be overall worse than the green one, and the green one doesn't see play. So this does not see play in constructed. I very rarely see it in draft. Again, might be once every like 20 or 30 games I'll get an opponent that will play it against me, but it's just not very good. Alright, next up we have Rend Armor. 3 mana. Modify a unit with -X armor, where X is its armor. This is okay. So right now, there's a decent amount of armor floating around in the meta, but it's not like a ton, and it's not so prevalent that I feel like this card needs to be ran. Even if you're up against like an Axe, for example, right? This essentially reads, 3 mana to do 2 more damage to Axe for the rest of the game, right? Because it's modify. It's okay. Like, I guess here's my best assessment, right? Most cases, people will talk about Viscous Nasal Goo, which is Bristleback's signature card, as being a drawback of Bristleback. They'll say he's got a great big body, but sometimes his card is clunky and doesn't help you very much. And most of the time, Viscous Nasal Goo is the exact same as this card, but it's 1 more mana, but you can also use it against heroes that don't have armor. So if this is only as good as Viscous Nasal Goo, and I'm not even convinced it's as good as Nasal Goo, because again, at least you can use that against anything, then this is probably not very good either. This could be good, again, if like armor starts to matter. Much like defensive stance, right? Like this could start to matter if armor matters heavily in the future. Rend Armor could matter a whole lot if armor matters a ton in the future, but right now, this card's just not good enough. And there are better ways to deal with armor in the near future anyway, in my opinion. Next up we have Smash Their Defenses. This is one of the 2 cards I had the pleasure of revealing when we were in the closed beta. 3 mana, Condemn an Improvement, draw a card. And everything I said in that reveal video I think stands. As long as you're in a meta where there's a lot of high impact improvements, this is a okay card to consider playing in your deck. I think it's situational, but it is a meta call. And at the time when I made that video, cheating death was everywhere. Now, things have changed a bit. We're still seeing improvements, but they're not like game-defining improvements. So this is still a meta call. This is the kind of card that you would consider running if you're really worried about a specific improvement. And if not, you would not want to run it because it's a dead card if you have nothing to play it against. If there's not an improvement present, you cannot play this to cycle and draw the card. So we've seen this be dead in certain tournaments. Even in the WePlay tournament that I was a part of, that I was hosting, there were a couple of times where players had smashed their defenses and it kind of just sat in their hand. So it is the sort of thing that is a little bit risky and constructive. You have to make a judgment call on what you expect to play against. In draft, I like it a little bit more just because typically people draft at least one improvement. And if you are drafting this because it's an uncommon, you're probably drafting it as a one of. And as a one of, it's fine. If you have one dead card in draft, it's not the end of the world. But, you know, if you stop a really powerful improvement in draft where card quality matters a lot, it could be a pretty big deal. So I'm a big fan of it in draft. And it's a call whether you want to play it or not in Constructed. Next up, we have Spot Weakness. This is the other card I had the pleasure of revealing during the closed beta. And I stand by the assessment on this as well. This is 3 mana, give a hero and its allied neighbors Pierce this round, draw a card. To me, this is also a bit of a meta call. You're trying to judge whether or not there's enough armor that you need to run Pierce. And the nice thing about this is because it grants Pierce and not like modifying by armor values the way Rend Armor does, is that if you run into decks that run Vesture of the Tyrant, this can still push damage pretty effectively on the tower because Pierce ignores armor essentially, and that includes armor on towers. So this card is multifunctional a bit. This card is also nice because unlike Smash Their Defenses, it can be played as long as you have the red hero present. So even if it's a quote-unquote dead card, you can still cycle it to draw a card and get it out of your hand and try to dig deeper, find something better. So still a meta call overall because you'll have to decide whether or not the Pierce is going to matter, but a little bit safer of a card to include than, say, Smash Their Defenses because this is never 100% dead. Next up, we have Clear the Deck. 4 mana, give allied heroes +4 cleave this round. This doesn't really see a lot of play in Constructed at the moment, but it sees a decent amount of play in draft, and rightfully so. It's very good in draft. +4 cleave is perfect. 4 is a magic number for killing melee creeps. So if you've got a lane with a couple of heroes that are correctly positioned, you can essentially clear the lane, just like Clear the Deck implies, and use this as your like AoE removal for cleaving through a bunch of stuff. You can also use this sometimes to take out opposing enemy heroes, because like if you've got a hero and then the enemy hero is here in front of one of your creeps and then you've got another hero over here, them both applying the +4 cleave means that that middle enemy hero would essentially be taking 8 cleave damage. So you can use this as a like surprise amount of burst damage sometimes as well. Cleave damage is also separate from the damage on the hero itself, so you can actually have scenarios where you've got like heroes with 2 or 3 attack, like your blue heroes, you know, a Kana, an Ogre, something like that, but then they'll deal more damage with Clear the Deck than they would have just attacking directly. So it's kind of cheeky fun sometimes, really catches people by surprise. Next up, we have Crippling Blow. This is 4 mana to modify a hero with -2 attack. This is not very good. It does not see a lot of play, and it does not see play in Constructed or even really draft. It's typically better to modify your own stuff with positive attack than it is to give an enemy hero minus attack, because the more you're being proactive, the more inevitability on the opposing like tower and the opposing heroes and creeps, etc. You create. Whereas with stall cards, the game already has like this built-in inevitability just by the core mechanics, right? With creeps respawning every time, with heroes coming back every time, trying to stall is usually a little bit less effective and certainly it's less effective in red, so this just kind of doesn't feel at home here. So it just doesn't see play. It's just not very good. In the future, if there are cards that care about enemy heroes that have very low attack values, then this might start to matter, but right now it's just not good enough. Next up we have Sucker Punch. Stun a unit blocking an allied red hero this round and deal 2 damage to that unit. This card is okay. It's a bit situational because it's based on position. So it's not just the allied red hero, but it's also the unit blocking the allied red hero. So if you're running a deck that has a lot of red heroes, 3 or more, this has the potential to be very powerful. Stun is a powerful effect, and stunning something that is like an enemy hero, for example, might lock them out of being able to play cards. But it's based on position, and it's based on position across your allied red heroes. So if you're not running like mono red, or you're not running 3 or more red heroes, you're less likely to get a good use out of this. Taking it a step further, at least in terms of constructed, this also got a bit of a nerf when Jasper Daggers got their rework, because now the enemy has a way to get around stun, whereas before it would have just been a lockout. So doesn't see a ton of play in constructed. I've seen it included in some mono red decks, but that's about it. In draft, it does see play, typically in the drafts that have like 3 red heroes, though I've had it played against me by somebody who played 1 red hero. Like, they splashed a Bristleback and they still were running Sucker Punch. But usually you don't want to do that. Just because somebody did it doesn't make it the right thing to do. Again, because it's highly situational, you want to run this when you are maximizing the chances that that situation arises. So that's where we are. Tresden Standards, 4 mana. Modify a red hero with, after you play a red card, give this hero and its allied neighbors +1 attack and +1 armor this round. So this card triggers itself, and it's pretty good in like mono red decks, because the +1 attack and +1 armor adds up, and because it is essentially the hero and the allied neighbors, you can really create some resiliency in a lane. Think about Rising Anger and Heroic Resolve that I mentioned earlier. If you're playing a mono red deck that's running those, and you're already planning on spamming some of those low cost cards, and then you throw this in, if you drop Tresden Standards and then on the following round you play, 2 of those smaller cards, right? A Rising Anger, a Heroic Resolve. Tresden Standards is going to trigger 2 more times, and you're getting like the effect of a Treant, but also with bonuses to attack, right? Like it does add up, and it can snowball pretty well. I'm a big fan of this card in draft as well. So while this in constructed, I've really only seen it played so far in the mono red decks. In draft, it is very, very powerful, and it can generate a lot of long-term value, especially in drafts where you get to play like 2 or 3 red heroes. It can shine there. Now it is a rare, so in draft it typically shows up as a 1-of, but it's still good enough to warrant a pick there. Next up we have Enough Magic. 5 mana, proceed to the combat phase. This is one of my favorite cards in the game, and I fell in love with this in the closed beta, and I did everything I could to make this be kind of nuts. For a long time I was playing around with this red-green like mid-rangey deck that was trying to abuse Drow and the old version of Gust, which was effectively locking out your opponent from playing cards. And then also running Enough Magic, because when you play Enough Magic, it proceeds to the combat phase, which means your opponent doesn't get to play any more cards either. So Enough Magic has a lot of potential in terms of power. The thing with Enough Magic that you have to remember is that, one, you really only want to use this when you're in a position of favorable combat. You don't want to proceed to combat if it's about to wreck you, even if it means preventing your opponent from playing stuff, because you don't want to cripple yourself. So it is a bit of a win more card. The other thing that you have to remember is anytime you play Enough Magic, you're guaranteed giving up initiative for the next round, because you play a card, then it goes to combat, and so in the next lane, your opponent begins with initiative. So there are some things to consider when you're playing it. but it can be very, very powerful. In fact, I think it might even be like under experimented with, or maybe slightly underplayed. I really like including it in a lot of my red decks as a one of, even if you never play it, but your opponent has to play around it, specifically in like tournaments where there's open deck lists. I think that the threat or the potential that it imposes is oftentimes really important. So it does see play in Constructed, though not a lot. Like I said, I think it's a bit underplayed potentially right now. It does see play in Draft, and I'm a big fan of it in Draft. And there's a lot of times where you can sneak up and surprise beat somebody in Draft because of it. So I like Enough Magic. Next up we have Raise. 5 mana. Condemn all enemy improvements. This is not really seeing a lot of play in Constructed right now, because we're not seeing a lot of like must kill improvements, and the ones that we do see are, you know, like, I'll put it this way, right? If we're in a meta where Smash their defenses is potentially a risky play, then Raise is probably a risky play as well. And as a result, Raise just doesn't see a lot of play in Constructed. If we see a lot of improvements pop up, or some really high value ones, then maybe we start to see Raise. That being said, in Draft, it's perfectly acceptable to play this. You're not picking it high. It kind of like falls to you in Draft. And you're probably running it as a one of because it is a rare, but as a one of it's fine for the same reasons that running one Smash their defenses is fine. Blowing up some key improvements in Draft where card quality is lower, so the improvements might have a higher impact. You know, even if you're killing like a Keenfolk turret or a Steam Cannon or something, you're getting your value out of Raise at that point, but you're not like excited, you know, oh my god, I got Raise, this is going to be amazing. Like, you're playing this as a like utility removal card in Draft as a one of because it fell to you and because, you know, it's safer to run there. So does see play, like I said, in Draft. Doesn't really see play in Constructed right now, just because the meta is not one where like you need to destroy those improvements. Even some of the peskier improvements like Conflagration and March of the Machines, for example, that you might want to remove, they get at least some value before you get the chance to remove them, right? Unless they're played in the same lane where the hero resides. But both of those are cross-lane playable, so a lot of times they're played cross-lane, so then when the action phase starts up, they deal their damage to the lane, and sometimes the damage has already been done at that point. So casting a Raise to get rid of it is more of like a dealing with the future sort of feeling. So yeah, that's Raise. Alright, next up we have Routed. I'll be honest, this is a card that I was very down on in the closed beta, and I'm coming around a bit to the value of potentially running it. So 6 mana, you modify enemy heroes at the fountain, and if you don't know what that means, that basically means ones that are not in play, so dead enemy heroes. But you modify them with -X attack, where X is half of their attack. You also modify them with your tower has -1 mana. So the half the attack is kind of a big deal. Like, if you can take Axe from 6 attack down to 3 attack, that's a pretty crippling play. The modify your tower with -1 mana is a big deal, because if it's a game that's relatively close and like you've won one lane and your opponent's won one lane and you're both heavily contesting a third and final lane, usually you and your opponent both start stacking heroes there, right? Because you want a greater presence. So you might have a lane that has 3 or 4 heroes from both players on each side. But if you've routed a bunch of their heroes, they can't sometimes afford to put them all in the same lane, because, you know, if you have 3 routed heroes in a contested lane, your tower has -3 mana, and that's a really big swing. So routed can put some pressure in your favor. That being said, you have to set it up as well, right? So you want to try to play routed when you've killed at least 3 heroes, or at least, I guess I should say 3 heroes are at the fountain. So another way that heroes can go to the fountain is things like Scroll of Town Portal, for example. That takes them back to the fountain. So sometimes you can play routed after they have done something cheeky and they think they're going to reposition their heroes. You can catch them off guard. That being said, if you run routed, it's probably as a one of, as like one of those situational tech cards. We did see some pretty amazing routeds get played during the We Play tournament and some of the other tournaments that have been casted, so there is value there. I was just down on it because it was so heavily situational, but the effect is powerful enough that, you know, you can just accidentally win a game if you catch the right routed. So I'm coming around on this card. Next up we have Spring the Trap. 7 mana, summon 2 Centaur Hunters into any lane. And we'll go ahead and just click over here. The Centaur Hunters are 4/8 creeps. This card does see play. It sees a lot of play. In Constructed and in Draft. Sees play in like the mid-rangey version of red-black, like hero killing decks, and it sees play in ramp red-green decks. It's very, very good. 2 4/8s is a lot of presence in a lane, and then the fact that you can cross-lane play this means it is very, very versatile. This is just a really powerful effect. You can use it defensively if you're trying to defend a lane. Getting 2 4/8s into a lane to just soak up damage and body block things is a big deal. You can use it offensively to help stack a lane that you're trying to pressure. It's just really good, and it's the sort of card you want to play in Constructed, in Draft, probably in the future unless something more powerful comes along. But right now it is strong. I mean, I don't know what else to say. 4/8 creeps are big creeps, and dropping 2 of them from any lane on the board seems like a good thing. And last up, perhaps like the red action, poster child for the game in many ways, we have Time of Triumph. 8 mana. You modify allied heroes with +4 attack, +4 armor, +4 health, +4 cleave, +4 retaliate, and +4 siege. That is a lot of +4s. Just give them all the +4s. This is seeing lots of play in Constructed. Basically, in all the decks that run Spring the Trap, they typically also run Time of Triumph. Some will only run 1 or 2. The ramp decks will run it as a 3 of because it's a great win condition to ramp into. Because it's Modify, this is one of those cards that you play and it just kind of helps you snowball throughout the game because you can use it to take a lane, and then you can use things like Blink Dagger to take your beefed up heroes and then jump them into another lane that you want to contest. Hitting Time of Triumph on like 3 heroes is oftentimes enough to just win a game outright or through attrition, unless that game has already been heavily pressured. So like the way you fight Time of Triumph is usually you try to get underneath that deck before they can pull it off. If you can get multiple Time of Triumphs resolved, it is like even crazier for obvious reasons. Like I said, it's seeing a lot of play in Constructed. If you want to see great Time of Triumph plays, you can go watch any of the casted tournaments we play, Seat Story, etc., because there's lots of examples. It's a very powerful card, and again, until better finishers come along, it's probably going to be in the meta for a long time. You do want to play this in Draft. This card is so powerful in Draft that if you open up a Time of Triumph, even if you're not playing red, like you could open up Time of Triumph in the last pack, right? Like let's say you're drafting and you're heavily black-green, and you open a Time of Triumph. You pick Time of Triumph and then you splash Keith the Bold, even if you have to run your Time of Triumph. It's that good and will have that big of an impact in Draft. It's powerful. So if you've been playing Artifact at all, you know that I'm preaching to the choir, and if you're new to Artifact, watch out for Time of Triumph. You will be seeing it an awful lot. And this is it. This wraps up the red spells and their reviews. So if you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you.